Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. My name is Jason.
And my name is Steve.
And what we do here is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. Today's topic is how to resolve conflicts that are keeping us apart. And before we kick off the conversation, if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question, so be sure to stay tuned for that. So to start, one of the things Steve says is conflict is an essential and inevitable part of every intimate relationship. And
I do say that.
That is something that I did not know. And I just started learning probably 2 years ago. So I guess we could start there and kind of go from there.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I was drawing a blank. You know, whenever you bring these subjects up, I have no idea what you're about to say. And then I think, well, I don't know if I have anything to say about that. But, you know, this does have a lot to do with sexuality because we're talking about how to have a healthy sexual relationship within a marriage or marriage-like relationship. And I think most of us I'm confident most of us start off with this irrational belief that, well, because we love each other, we'll never really fight.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, or that fighting is a sign that we're having a really bad relationship or things are about to die here. This is the death knell of our relationship. So we try to minimize it. We try to avoid it. We try to do anything but actually engage in the conflict. Now, having said that, I want to make sure everybody who's listening to this knows that, first of all, you got to master that concept before we can have a good relationship. We first have to have a safe relationship. And that means that we have both already given up anything that could be called abusive. We're both respectful. All of our behaviors are respectful. We don't do eye rolls on each other unless it's for a laugh and a laugh to both of us. We don't do any name calling or put downs, and certainly no physical abuse or anything like that. So it's when you subtract all of the abuse out of a fight, there's really nothing to be afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, really, it's just like two people are unhappy, and our only mission here is to figure out a solution so that we can both live together happily. So we might be fighting about something like, she wants me to go to craft fairs with her. I don't want to go to craft fairs ever again, so long as I live. I'd rather take a bullet. And but it's something she really likes.
Yeah.
And the challenge, and she feels really connected and really happy when we're together on a craft fair. And so many people probably even listening to this would say, well, sometimes you have to compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And I do appreciate the spirit of compromise when it comes to certain things like, well, we don't always have to have me wash the dishes. Maybe we could split and take turns washing the dishes, or we could always do the dishes together for the most part, or there's some sort of a compromise there where we're sharing chores in a fair and equitable way. But when it comes to actually doing things I don't want to do, I always kind of fall back on something that's incredibly vulgar. So if you have small children, you might want to pause the podcast at this point. But there are some men who are, for example, really into anal sex. And of course, there are some women who are into that too. But imagine the guy telling his girlfriend, yeah, I really like anal sex. And she smiles broadly and says, yeah, me too. I'm really looking forward to it. I've got my strap on in my overnight bag. Let's go. And he says, what? And then he says, no. I want to do that to you. And she said, no, I want to do that to you. And in the spirit of compromise, it's only a 9-inch dildo on the strap-on. So spirit of compromise would be 4.5 inches.
Yeah.
And and even most guys would balk at that and say, I don't think compromise is the right answer here. Because if it's something I really don't want to do, then I don't even want to do it a little bit. And so, back to the craft fair idea, it's a big planet out there, and there have to be other activities where we could feel close and connected and both enjoy it. Maybe we go to a movie together, maybe we go to a museum, maybe we go to a concert, but there's so many activities we could do together that just say, well, no, it has to be this one thing that I really like and you really hate. Otherwise you don't love me.
Yeah.
And that's just so wrong for so many reasons. So, having conflict, when you take out all of the abuse, leaves the couple with really kind of being the executive board of directors, and they're having a meeting, and there's been a breakdown. The problem and the occasion for the meeting is there's a breakdown in the production of the service that they're creating or the product they're creating in this company. What is the product or service in a marriage? Happiness. And if we're not happy, or if one of us is profoundly unhappy, we need to talk and figure out what's causing that breakdown in our production and to solve the problem. And we can do that because it's not that complicated. It's a human problem with a very human solution. And it's also a measure, a litmus test, if you will, of, are we a problem-solving couple? Are we capable of efficiently and respectfully solving the problems that beset us, that life sets before us, that any couple is going to have to face, no matter how compatible they are? We are all going to be faced with an unfolding future that's going to have the unknown facing us. And it's really, this conversation is really about our capacity for communicating and for really listening to the other person and for being flexible and creative in our problem solving. Now, I've been in one really great marriage and one really awful marriage, and I'm delighted to say, oh yeah, there's a big difference, and it's really wonderful. But I don't know that I could be a good problem solver with just anybody, and I don't know that that's something everyone out there can do. I think you have to, give it a try with the person you're with. I think, okay, for the men listening to this, how many times on a date did you pick her up to take her out to dinner and she says, where are we going? And well, we can go anywhere you want. Where would you like to go? Oh, I don't care. Wherever you want to go. Okay, I got a place in mind. Well, where is it? Well, it's this little hole in the wall. You haven't heard of it. I'm just going to take it. Well, what's it like? Okay, well, it doesn't matter. Let's go wherever you want to go. No, I want you to choose. And we're going back and forth, and people break up over these kinds of conversations because it's just interminable. And that's, and I've had those conversations myself when dating, and it's extremely unpleasant because it's saying, I really don't, on the surface, one person is saying, I really don't care. I just want to be with you, and the pleasure of your company is such. We could be at a fast food place, or we could be at a fine dinner house. It just doesn't matter because I just want to spend the time with you. You decide, and the other person in good conscience decides, and then gets nothing but the double message, the criticism, the questioning, the interrogation that says, yeah, but you made the wrong choice. So now what do we do? And if you can't see that and have a laugh at yourselves and enjoy the kind of the sweet silliness of the moment, and then figure out what to do next. Like, is it a coin toss? Do we take turns picking? It's kind of like movies, like he invites her to go to the movies and he takes her to whatever it is, Death Match 3000. And she does not have a good time. And so he said, well, you pick the next movie. And she takes him to some romantic movie with the faces, exploding off of the screen, big supersized faces, talking about love and romance, and he's like dying over there because of the conversations that just go on forever. And usually we all kind of settle on rom-coms as a safe alternative. But as fun as a good rom-com can be in terms of problem solving, and that's kind of a nice compromise, it's also sort of a bit of a want, because I don't really know how she thinks or what she enjoys or what she would like to do. And it's not that I want to go to every movie she wants to see, or that she would want to go to every movie I would want to see. because being a typical American man, I find gratuitous violence very calming and soothing. So those are just training films, honey. You never know when 100,000 communist Chinese are going to come over the mountain. So you got to be ready. And for me, problem solving in a relationship starts with that first place of no abuse. But it's not a guarantee. It's like an abuse-free relationship is not a guarantee that it'll be a good one. It's just that it's got to be abuse-free to set the stage to see if it'll be a good one. Mm-hmm. Because it could be abuse-free, and incredibly boring.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the same thing with problem solving. I mean, I think I've been in relationships with women who are not abusive, but we could still never be effective as a team solving problems. Mm. And so there's no guarantees. That just sort of sets the stage.
Yeah.
And then after that, you kind of have to see what happens, I think. What we want is, intelligent people who care about us, our feelings matter. It's important that we're happy too. And people who are flexible. But after that, it's like, what else? What else do you need? Well, the understanding that having a fight, and I mean a passionate fight, I don't mean an abusive fight, but a fight about issues I really care about, or she really cares about, or that we're both really quite passionate about. It's normal to have those conflicts. Like, how are we going to raise the kids? Or how much money are we going to save? Mm-hmm. Or what do we want this part of our life to look like? That is really a normal thing. The challenge is, though, when you're observing ego in the middle of a fight is saying to you, Jason, if you've had this fight once, you've had it 100 times. Mm-hmm. And that's a sign that the two of you are not doing very well at problem solving. Mm-hmm. And it may mean any number of things. It may mean I'm a terrible problem solver myself. It may mean she's a terrible problem solver. It may mean, we're just really not good together. We're not a very harmonious team. And maybe there's a remedy for that. Like, if I could digress, we could break up. But if I could digress with a personal story, I was on a vacation one time with my wife to a city we were both unfamiliar with. And I had purchased one of those laminated maps with the big exploded view of certain important neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And really was digging this map. It was really there was a lot of pleasure of ownership. I don't think it exists anymore in my life, but I just am the kind of traveler who, having grown up in a relatively small town, I like just being in a different environment. I like soaking up the atmosphere. In a word, I am slow. And my wife is an LA girl, and she's always had this incredible onboard computer that could calculate immediately what was the shortest route between point A and point B. And for her, that's the strategy you use to solve all problems when traveling. You always go for the most efficient route. Mm-hmm. Whereas I kept looking at my map, and I'm just still getting my bearings. And the Tower of London is just 3 blocks over that way. That is so cool. Or, can you believe it? Everybody's driving on the wrong side of the street in this city. And, whatever it was, I just found the whole experience just like I just was steeping myself like a tea bag in a cup. I was just enjoying sitting there in the middle of all that. And she very gently put a hand on my map. And she very gently started pulling the map in front of her so that she could point out exactly the route we needed to take according to her way of experiencing life. And I remember, okay, but I want to look at this map some more. And I'm pulling it back. And it was like a scene out of a rom-com because the map kept going back and forth in front of each one of us. And then finally I just started cracking up, and she was irritated by this point. And she said, "What are you laughing about?" And I said, and I pointed out what was happening. And she said, "Well, what do you think we should do?" And I said, "I tell you what if for the rest of our relationship, as long as it shall last, we take turns on who gets to decide left or right, stay here, go forward, that all decisions will be made based on what date it is. Well, what date? What do you mean by date? I said, well, we could do it odd and even. And I could take the odd days and you could have the even days. And she said, yeah, but why do you want the odd days? Very suspicious woman. And I think she'd been hurt. And I said, well, because it's just really odd for a guy to have any say-so whatsoever in a relationship. She started laughing. And she, whatever day it was, I don't even remember what day. The date
was that an odd day? Or
I don't remember. Yeah. But, from then on, whenever we get into a little bit of an argument, it's, okay, what day is it? And, or what's the date? And it's just a FYI to the guys out there. There are more odd days in a year than there are even days.
That's where now I see.
Yeah. It's very, very clever on my part. So, but I think the idea would be for me, I don't want it to be an effort. I want it to be effortless. And I do trust her, but we are both firstborn children in our family. And so we're both used to being the leader, and being in control. And it just seemed like a very benign way to give up control. And it seemed equitable, except for that occasional one day here and there that I might have extra, going from the 31st to the 1st of the next month. But that's okay. It worked for both of us. And there are countless other examples of things like that where you just have to keep coming up with ever more creative solutions. One example, in therapy, somebody comes up with a solution. Well, I'm not sure that would work. Well, what do you say we just try it for 30 days and then we get together for another little meeting and we decide if we liked it or we didn't, or if we want to modify it, and we can just go to the end of the month. What do you say? Well, I guess so we could try it for 1 month. And most of us are willing to try something for a month, like sharing chores in a different way or modifying something else. And then, this is not much of a conversation. I'm kind of just riffing on all the things that are coming to my mind. And one that comes up an awful lot are things like that are more emotional, right? Where he objects to her friends. He doesn't, or she doesn't like his music or his activities or something like that. And I think there it's really an issue of boundaries.
All right.
Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody when I say that, but I'm looking at you, Jason, and you're incredibly hairy. And you've got a beard and a mustache and long hair where I have none whatsoever. And I've got eyebrows, and that's pretty much the end of the hair on my head. And if my partner were trying to be controlling about my haircut, I would have to say that's a boundary issue because it's, after all, my head.
Yeah.
And it's my decision.
I see.
And it's the same way with, and this comes up, my wife has short hair, and she was recently asked, well, what does your husband think of your short hair, by her hair cutter, her new hair cutter? She said, oh, he loves it. And I do. I'd probably love whatever she did. But mainly because I don't even want to think about how she should be groomed. I don't have the bandwidth to decide. I just know that I like her, and whatever she does is probably going to be fine, even if she shaved her head. And well, her hair cutter said, well, that's good, because most women out there with long hair wish they could cut it short, but their husbands won't let them. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that would be something worth fighting over.
Yeah.
And because I think none of us have the right to impose our will on somebody else's grooming or any of these other personal things, like who you or I pick for a friend. Yeah. Or what we do for recreation, or what we're reading.
How we dress.
How we dress. Yeah, exactly. And I think there's so many areas of life that are like that. And yeah, I remember one married man, his wife would say, he'd get ready to go out with her, and she'd say, oh, oh my God, are you going to go dressed like that? He'd say, well, what's wrong with it? Oh, never mind. Just get in the car.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, besides being abusive, because it's so disrespectful to talk to one another that way, the whole idea that there's a right and a wrong way to dress, that it's somehow offensive that to me that you would dress that way, that just seems overly controlling and really at the end of it all, like, well, I really don't love this person. If the way they dress is a deal breaker for whether or not I'm going to enjoy their company, I'm probably with the wrong person, or they are, or we both are, because that's really not who they are. I mean, it's a tiny part of, I guess, of who they are, but we're supposed to be marrying people we love, not marrying them so we can make the necessary modifications so that they can be as perfect as we know that they want to be.
Yeah. What is that about? That's just some controlling behavior with the other people. I had a friend who was like that would criticize me and my clothes, my hair, and
oh my God, yeah,
facial hair, what I did. It was, I mean, no longer friends with him. And
yeah, it's really not sustainable after a while.
Yeah.
It's
really, it's just like, I don't know, man. It's like, just lay off me. It's like, that's a relationship I should have left a long time ago.
Well, it's funny that you'd say that, because I just think there's kind of a world of meaning in that experience, because friendship is really, in a way, easier than marriage, right? Because it involves no sex or romance.
Yeah.
And yet, even in that relationship, you found yourself staying too long and maybe avoiding the confrontation. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, fucktard, I'm not, here to conform to your notions of good grooming. If you don't like it, you can shove off.
Yeah, I know. I needed that language 20 years ago.
Really, the kind of language that's going to get me arrested by the language police. I didn't have that language either, because again, for me, conflict was a bad thing. And
same.
And even anger was a bad thing in my family, because my dad was a career criminal and he was very violent. And the women in my family, I remember asking my mother and my grandmother, that were in the same room one time. I said, am I like my dad? He had been the victim of a police homicide when I was 12. And I said, am I anything like my dad? Oh, honey, you're nothing like your father. And they meant to be reassuring, and they thought that was a really good thing. But of course, like every other normal kid, I wanted to be something like my dad in some positive, good way. But the two women had worked really hard at conveying to me the idea that anger means you're out of control. Anger is bad, because for them, anger was always associated with abuse. But in our discussions, you and I have successfully strategized, okay, we're going to have abuse-free relationships with women, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be anger, because anger is a normal human emotion. And the only hope you would have of not having anger would be, well, fruitless, because you'd have to just repress it and perhaps repress your knowledge of it. But anger is, I think, the rocket fuel that gives me the courage to face my fear and to bring up hard things for the two of us to talk about. Because sometimes I just can't find the courage to bring up the thing I'm afraid of, like talking about one of her relatives, or something that's near and dear to her heart, or, whatever it is, or that I just don't want to go to church anymore, because what does that mean? Now we're the atheist family or whatever, so now we all have to go to hell. Thanks a lot, Steve. So I think I welcome anger, but just anger with no abuse. And for some people, that's an oxymoron. That just does not make any sense. How can you be angry? In fact, I've had adults to whom I said, I'm just really angry with what you did and the way you behaved. In that tone of voice, that volume of voice I just used. How dare you talk to me that way? How dare you insult me like that and be so disrespectful, when all I did was talk about myself.
Yeah.
So for so many people in our culture, anger is conflated with abuse and disrespect. And I really think, that's part of the intentional interview. Staying in a relationship long enough as to unmarried people, to non-engaged people, to have at least 3 good arguments. And when I was dating, I would always tell women, if we made it past the second or third date, oh yeah, I wouldn't want to make a commitment with anybody I hadn't had at least 3 good arguments with. And I would never want to argue with you. Yes.
She's gone.
Yeah. Well, I would explain patiently everything we talked about.
Did they get it when you did that?
Well, I think at least cognitively, I think everybody understands that. Well, from a phenomenological point of view, you and I are looking at each other in this room and we see it from a completely different perspective because we're different people. And that's just normal. But it also means to me that we're 2 people who look at life differently from 2 different perspectives. Mm-hmm. So it would be normal for us to have 2 divergent opinions on, is it a good idea or a bad idea to take a given course of action?
Yeah.
I think those divergences of opinion make for a really meaningful, thoughtful conversation and a reflection on whether or not something is a good idea.
Yeah.
Do we turn left or do we turn right? Mm-hmm. Do we invest in this or do we not invest in this? And so the idea that, but I might feel really strongly about turning left and just as strongly as you feel about turning right. And so we get into this argument and we make our pitch. But just like 2 business partners, they don't, in an effective partnership, if they're making widgets in their business, they don't really care about whether we do it this way or that way. What they care about is profit. And the only profit in a relationship is happiness.
Yeah.
So I don't really care if we turn left or right, but I just want to know, how can I be happy if I don't get to see the Tower of London today? Mm-hmm. And how are you going to be happy if you don't get to take the efficient route over to this other location we're headed toward?
Are there some people really quick that when you do present them with that they're so resistant that they can't even have that, or they're not even willing to find a solution because they're so hung up on the argument or the disagreement?
Oh, give me an example of what you're talking about.
So say someone wants to go left or the date thing that we talked about, as far as odd or even, they're like, no, I don't like that. It's not good.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's like, no.
Yeah, there are.
And they want to just stay mad and they just want to stay upset and they're not even looking for a solution, even though it's very rational and very fair, even though you did do the math and you are cheating a little bit, but
it was my idea. Yeah. I deserve a little something, but
that I'm saying,
yes.
Are there some people that are so wrapped up in themselves to where they can't?
We all know the answer to that. And that's yes,
okay.
Right. And there are people who they see power as a zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. So if I give up some power to you, that means I have less power. And for them, power is what life is all about. Whereas for me, in a relationship, whether it's a friend or a lover, it's the relationship. It's all about the connection. But not everybody feels that way. Not everybody sees it that way. And I get that, but that would not be the person I would want to share my life with, whether it was as a friend, just a platonic relationship with a buddy, or as a girlfriend. That's just not going to work for me.
And that's why you want to see those, like you said, you like having 3 arguments to see if that's even possible, because if you didn't do that, then you get married. Next thing you know, you have the left or right, or you have the odd or even discussion, and it's unsolvable.
Yeah, and you never noticed before that that's how they feel about all these issues, and that you really can't be effective problem solvers. Like the couple I'm aware of who lived together for 2 decades, and they were never able to agree on a wall hanging, and so their house was just sheetrocked walls painted white with no pictures on them at all for the better part of 2 decades.
Wow.
Now that's really like living in a cave, except not as interesting as a cave. And it just kind of hurts the eyes. It was really sterile. It really felt, but they couldn't agree on anything. They couldn't agree on, well, what if you do this room and I do that room? Or well, what if we both like an individual painting together? And could we maybe hang something like that? Or what about reproductions that we frame that don't cost too much, and then we kind of change them out? And I have the ones I like that that are hanging half the time. There was like no solution that could be figured out. So they just decided not to solve that problem. And to me, I would never want to live that way.
Yeah.
That would just not really work. The couple who he likes his kind of music, she likes her kind of music. And again, there's a boundary issue. How many times have guys gotten in the vehicle, or women got in the vehicle with their lover, and they hate that song and they reach over to turn the radio to something else, or they can't wait to get to a different genre of music. And I think the old rule about, hey, my ride, my music, I'm driving.
That's a rule, right?
Right.
And every time, my rule was people get in the passenger seat and they start changing the station right away. And I'm like, that happened to me so many times. So
really, in your life, you'd be driving and they would change.
I'd be like, no, I get to do this.
Hands off. That's my radio.
They do radio, they do heat, air, they do everything.
Oh my God. Yeah. Instead of
asking. That's where my problems come from.
Right. Because that is a boundary issue. And so many, this is really, it's really hard to look in the mirror and see how many of our problems are really ultimately about us. Because if I'm getting treated like a doormat by someone, really, I have to admit it's because I've trained them to treat me like a doormat.
Yeah.
And I've done that. I've done that in relationships.
Yeah, I've done it too.
Because I was avoidant of conflict.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of embracing conflict and finding maybe a humorous light touch, maybe a playful touch to it, and to say, hold up there, Rocky, wait a minute, and pulling the car over to the side of the road and going back to that station and saying, if you want anything done with this dashboard, all you got to do is go through me. You just got to submit your request in triplicate, and I will thoughtfully consider it before saying no.
I'm the DJ here. I'll just go up and
if you want control of the radio, just pick me up in your car. I don't have a car. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, there's just, but there's some boundaries, right? It'd be like somebody coming over to your house and then just helping themselves to anything and everything in the house, or moving your furniture around, or doing anything when it's not their stuff. I would, it's like people who borrow books and don't return them.
Yeah.
I hate those people.
I actually returned that book that I borrowed already, by the way. It was just,
I wasn't thinking of you. I was thinking, I have lent out so many books over my life, and I laugh about it now because I just don't lend books.
Yeah.
And if somebody wants to read a book of mine, if I'm ready to part with it, I just give it to them because it is so frustrating. But when we talk about this, it's really about boundaries.
Yeah.
And how much do you want to be controlled by somebody else? For me, the answer is 0.
0. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I want a partner in life, ideally, right? I can live happily alone, but I would love to have a partner because that would be an enhanced lifestyle. But I don't need a new mommy. I'm not a little boy. I don't want to be told what clothes I can wear or how I need to cut my hair.
Yeah.
I'm willing to discuss fashion because I find it endlessly interesting. I'm willing to discuss grooming. But there's a difference between a discussion and a covert pressure campaign.
Yeah.
And we all feel the difference.
Yeah. And there's another thing you talk about in conflict too. You say a lot of it's no abuse. And another part of that is any one subject, you say a lot of times.
Oh, I've got these conflict cards available to anybody who writes us. And they have that saying on it, that quote, conflict is an essential and inevitable part of every intimate relationship on one side. And then on the other side, there are the 3 rules for fair fighting. The first rule is no abuse.
And this is A physical card you have?
Yeah,
How
you've
come
never
I don't,
seen
I don't,
this?
I don't have it.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure we must have some around this office. So I'll get you some, but and you need them because those cards have gotten desperate men laid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because inevitably somebody is going to say, well, what are you looking for in life?
Mm-hmm. Let me look at my card here. So.
Well, you get to say an abuse-free life, or you get to say, hey, and because women really dig men who are in therapy, you get to say, my therapist. Because in a way, I am your therapist because you do know me and I am a therapist. So,
well, I did it for about 2.5, 3 years recently. And I got out of it last month.
Yeah,
so I was scared.
My new therapist.
Yeah,
gave me this card, and then you.
Or am I therapizing you?
Well, that's how all therapy works. To be honest with you, I've learned so much from my clients over the years. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't be charging; I should be paying them because they're just so wonderful. But the second rule after no abuse is any one subject, and I explained to different women over the years, but to my wife, including her, that, honey, I'm just a man. And I know you women can, multitask and hold many things in mind all at the same time, but I just need to solve one problem at a time. That's all I'm competent to do. And if I try to do more than that when I'm talking to you about what's going on in April, and you say, well, what about last Christmas when you were drunk and knocked over the Christmas tree? Well, I'm not going to, I can't address last Christmas and what happened then. But I try to be open-minded and fair, but I just want to leave it at this one subject. So resolving conflict for me in a relationship means, I'm going to give the last rule. The third rule on the rules card says that we are going to argue by mutual consent, meaning we each there'll be no drive-by arguing, no unfair bringing something up just before somebody has to leave for work, for example. It would go something like this. Hey, I have a bone to pick with you. Is this a good time for us to talk? And she says, well, no, not really. I don't think so because I have to leave for work in an hour. Well, can you give me 5 minutes? Because I think this is a 5-minute problem, really. And if it turns out to be more than that, we could reschedule. Sure. And then we either go forward or we don't, depending on if we can both give consent. But the whole point of it is that we're not being driven by our rage or our resentments, our emotions. We're not being driven by our fears. We're there to address a production problem. There's just not enough happiness in this great relationship, and we want more. So how can we increase the amount of happiness? And I wasn't joking about the cards being effective because I think all right-minded women want to have an abuse-free relationship.
Yeah.
Because in general, you don't date women who are bigger and tougher than you. So, mixed martial artists who love wiping the floor with every guy they know, you would tend to be dating women who would be not exactly a good physical match for you in terms of combat.
Yeah.
So having an abuse-free relationship means no physical abuse, which they're glad to think won't happen, but it also means no emotional abuse and no spiritual abuse. There's no abuse of any kind. It's all about respect all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't go forward in a relationship. I mean, I might date somebody recreationally who's not into that just because she's good at an activity I like skiing or something else. But I'm not going to be getting serious with somebody who says, yeah, no, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
So.
And that's called fair fighting is how you kind of put that.
Yeah. Like in the old movies where they talk about the rules according to Hoyle, when they're boxing, and you don't just go in there and knee somebody in the groin and then throat punch them. And, there's like rules for boxing. And then even the Geneva Convention has rules for fighting war. Why would we turn our home into the law of the jungle and where might makes right and anything goes? That's like crazy talk. Of course, we need some rules. It's a civilized relationship. We need civilized rules. And I've boiled the rules down to just these three very simple ones: no abuse, any one subject. We can talk about anything, but only one thing at a time. And the person who brings up the request is the one who owns that one topic. And if it reminds me of all the other things I wanted to talk about, I have to bring those up on my own at a different time. And then lastly, by mutual consent, we're gonna do this. Arguing actually is kind of a cool thing if people can get into the spirit of this, because what we're going to do, the two of us, is resolve a conflict that's keeping us apart from one another, so that we can dance the dance of life even more closely embraced. And that's a pretty cool thing. But we need to negotiate, how can we be that close and still be safe with each other?
And that's also building intimacy, as we talk about.
Absolutely. So that we're like fearless and we feel safe all the time, no matter what the topic is.
Yeah. Because if you could talk about anything, it's like anything's on the table, and you're not afraid to go up to somebody and say something and get that eye roll or get the again, or
right.
Because what if that happens? And my last relationship was kind of like this. Maybe I was just a bad problem solver, but it was like, oh, we talked about this all the time, or this or that, and I'm like, well, it's still not resolved, or I'm trying to resolve it. That's like, but there just wasn't any.
And she was annoyed just that you kept wanting to talk about it.
Yeah, just talking. And I think you've had those situations too in past relationships where it's like, I talk too much or whatever. But I didn't even have those three simple rules like during the time. If I had, and like the no abuse, the mutual consent.
Okay, I'll give you a card. It's like, I'll
give me a card. Otherwise I'm going to repeat the same thing again. And then I'll be like, well, I blame Steve because he didn't give me that damn card. I want to talk about I love the idea of the relationship or the marriage, whatever, as a corporation. Some people really don't like that. I believe they think that you're taking all the romance out of that by considering it that way.
Right.
But to me, when you understand that and you could stay on that happiness production line and it's flowing and everything's going good, you're going to have the best moments, the best sex, the best everything, intimacy, and just accepting that, because I just think it's like such a good thing. Or what do you feel about like people? Do you get resistance from clients that say that's too corporate, that takes all love out of it? And I like the passion. Fighting's about passion and screaming and slamming doors. And
if I'm upset about something, I don't want to have to wait to the weekend when we're both free to talk about it for an hour.
Yeah.
And for me, it's an issue about maturity, which is defined by some as the ability to engage in deferred gratification. So a lot of us like immediate gratification, and I'm certainly open to immediate gratification, but there's certain things in life I think worth waiting for. And we wait for the weekends to stop going to work and do things that we like to do on the weekends. Why would we not wait for the weekends when I'm totally rested and I'm bringing my best to the conflict instead of the leftovers of my day after work, and I'm exhausted and I'm hungry, and like a big baby that I am, I'm kind of irritable, and I would rather just really bring my mind to the problem solving arena when I'm fresh, when I'm fully caffeinated and ready to go. And I'm looking forward to this. And what's funny, and I think everybody out there can relate to this, or believe me when I say, if you have an issue that's really bothering you on a Wednesday, and the two of you are so busy that you don't really have time to have a good argument until Saturday morning after breakfast, a lot of times by Saturday morning after breakfast, the argument is now in a completely different light. It's much more subdued. It's more, the conversation's more rational, because having an argument when I'm at the height of my frustration and my irritation, it's kind of the wrong time to be having an argument, because we're trying, remember, to solve a problem. It's a problem that has bedeviled us. It's like solving one of those escape rooms that people go to on a day. Who wants to go to an escape room when you're exhausted and you're miserably hungry? That does not sound like a fun date.
Well, maybe it might help you get out faster.
No, I honestly, well, your brain isn't going to be working as well because you only have so much bandwidth, right? and your bandwidth is going to be clogged by oh, I'm still so hungry. Oh my God, when can we eat? Or I'm exhausted. I just need to lie down. I cannot believe we're doing this. I can't believe he or she brought me to this thing. And for me, I know a lot of my metaphors fall on deaf ears because people don't like them. I think of marriage as a contract. People don't like that. I think of some of our arguments being more like executive board meetings. People don't like that. But what really, I'm open to different alternatives, but not everything has to be squishy and ooey gooey in a romance. Some things can be just real businesslike and handled in a very straightforward, objective manner. And with a good spirit, where we're both laughing and chuckling at each other's jokes. And we're holding this thing so much more loosely than the couple who are at each other's throats because they're so upset, and then he gets defensive and he's telling her, well, what do you think? Who do you think you are anyway? You're not so great. And now it's getting abusive and controlling.
Yeah.
And regarding your last relationship, it just seems to me like no argument is really solved until we both come to an agreement on what the solution is. It's not endless talking. I don't even like that kind of therapy. Well, John, how do you feel about what Mary said?
Yeah.
And Mary, when John says that, what are you feeling? And then 5 years later, we're still talking like that. Oh my God, come on. We can move a little faster than that. It's not that hard. And
they really want to, keep those clients.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So if the two of you can say, okay, then one says to the other, okay, then. So the deal is from now on, when we are disagreeing about where we're going to eat dinner, when we go out, we're just going to take turns. And whoever's turn it is, they get to decide, and the other person promises to go along cheerfully with their decision. Is that what we agreed to? And the other person says, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Well, okay, then I'm down for that.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I didn't even have the ability to say that because I think I was so shaken up by just the reaction. And then you're like, oh, I don't want to make her more mad. So I'm just going to kind of shut up and fizzle out. And but then I wouldn't do that now. It's like, now it would be like, that's just unacceptable, or this, I would leave. I wouldn't stay in that relationship. It's like, but I've learned through the failures and also just having a life where I don't have to deal with that. It's like, I don't think anyone should have to put up with that sort of stuff. And
yeah. Now, what does this have to do with sexuality? Well,
because I wasn't having sex either.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, she doesn't respect me. She resented me.
Right. It's all interconnected. Yeah. If we don't have boundaries, if we can't solve problems, how's the sex really going to be? And some people say, well, makeup sex is really great.
But makeup sex, I feel like you need to go to those levels of abuse. I feel like you need to go screaming and doing all that stuff. And I think this idea of the corporation keeps the feelings, there's still feelings there, but you're not being led by that emotion. And in improv, when you're led by emotion, you say horrible things. You're not thinking correctly. You're just kind of going, because that's what we do with character work. When I teach improv comedy, it's like you tap into the emotion and let the emotion guide you, but you're on stage. It's a safe place to do that and to be abusive to the character or whatever, because it's comedy. So,
and it's make-believe.
It's not real life, but real life, when you live that way, you scream and do all that sort of stuff and your heart rate gets up, and then you go and you have sex, and maybe it's good in a sense, but it's not, because it's unsafe.
I've been told before by women with whom I'm very incompatible that I'm very boring. And I can believe that for them, because for them, they normalized the drama that comes from those kinds of arguments. And it meant if you were trying to be calm and rational to solve where you're going to dinner, then that meant you really didn't care.
Yeah.
And if you really cared, of course you'd be yelling. So I yell because I care.
Mm-hmm.
And
but that's not on a car. You don't have a car.
I don't have a card.
You don't have a card for that
Although
one.
It would be a great T-shirt.
Yeah,
I yell because I care. And so that's not the life I'm looking for. I don't want a life of high drama. I don't mind drama when I go to a movie, but I don't want drama in my day-to-day personal life. And so for me, having some rules, like even boxers have rules, even armies have rules, when it comes to killing each other. We could have rules when it comes to going to dinner.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a knockdown, drag out shouting match. And I just, that kind of abuse, it just exacts a toll on our mental health. And it really subtracts from our overall quality of life. It's not for me. And I think the people listening to this need to decide for themselves, is that what you're looking for? Because if that's what you're looking for, then you don't get to have a board meeting of the executive committee deciding, what we're going to do about happiness when it comes to going to craft fairs.
Yeah.
And that should be a solvable problem, but people could argue like for days on that thing, for years. You never go with me anymore. Well, I hate your craft fairs. And why does it have to be like that? It doesn't. I don't think it has to be like that. It's not that significant.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of this too, like you're saying, it comes down, a lot of these things we talk about comes down to choice. Like we all have the ability to choose if we want to implement the stuff that you're talking about and teaching, or if we don't want to. And for me, I mean, for 3 failed relationships, I'm obviously not doing something right. So then to get someone like you who's like, this is how you have fair fighting. Conflict is okay. This is how you could have it and resolve it. And hey, when you do solve a problem, you get a little level up in intimacy and you get a little closer and things get happier and things get easier. And it's like
sex gets better.
You're actually having it. It's like, so with all these things, it's like for me, I'm like the choice is clear. It's like, it's either repeat the same patterns or start implementing these ideas into my life. And even when I do it with friendships, like I've done similar stuff, like address things within friendships, like during all this, and said some things to friends, and sometimes friends react poorly to it. But at the same time, it feels good because you're actually finally standing in your power, saying the thing you need to say. You're not feeling like you're walked over. You feel like you're heard. And it's really
And
good.
If you get dumped by a lover or a friend because you did stand up for yourself, again, it's a litmus test of how much they valued you and the relationship. Because if you didn't like them, say, fiddling with the radio each time they got in the car, and that was enough to drive them out of the relationship, it's like, wow, I really didn't matter to them very much at all.
Yeah.
It's like, get your own damn ride,
Yeah. I remember my one friend would put his shoes on top of my dashboard.
Oh my God.
And this is the same friend. I mean, a lot, and I would be like, it would really bug me. And I'm like, it's just like, and then I had to tell him to take it off. And then he just put his sock up there, or with his like barefoot. I'm just like, I don't know. Dude,
a little respect here.
I know. That's kind of crazy though, isn't it? They bring it on you like I'm crazy because I'm not letting them just do whatever they want to do.
Right. You're being rigid and controlling. But at the end of the day, it's your stuff. It's your car.
Yeah.
And you're going out of your way to allow them to have a ride. And so if you get to have it your way, I think when it comes to your money, your house, your life, your grooming, these are all clear boundaries, right?
Yeah.
It's yours to do with as you choose. And you didn't have a meeting where you gave up the right to have those things being treated. So if I know you love books too, and for somebody to borrow your book, but treat it disrespectfully and damage it and return it to you damaged.
Yeah, I'd be pissed.
I'd be pissed too. I mean, oh my God, no, keep it. You ruined it now for me. And we'll never be talking about borrowing a book again. Asshole.
So yeah, so conflict, I think it's so important to have it. And like to have good models as well. I think for parents out there, like there's a few times, not a lot, like my parents did fight in front of us as kids. It wasn't a lot. But it was like explosions, and it was like, wow,
Right.
that's what you associate with fighting, because it wasn't. They were pretty, normal, but it's like when they did have a fight, it was like big.
Right.
And
And for a little boy, I mean, the little boy you once were, that would be an example of early childhood trauma, because if something like that happens when I'm like 4 or 5,
mm-hmm.
and to think they didn't argue when you say from 4 to 8, those are pretty vulnerable years, right?
Yeah,
And for a child, that's terrifying.
yeah, it was. I remember it like it happening. Like me and my
Right.
sister both remember it, and it's like that was. I remember thinking as a kid, I'm like, this is kind of insane. Like, but I didn't have the words to say it. But I remember being like, what the hell was that? Because it was just a normal dinner. And then it's like one thing led to another. And then it's just like this huge explosion. It's like, well, you two obviously aren't taking, they're obviously not resolving their conflicts properly.
Right. Well, they're
If
escalating.
they're reaching to that level.
Right. They're escalating the conflict. Mm-hmm. And then what happens to love? And again, I go back to sex because that's why we're having these podcasts. And love, it's not just that we have sex or we don't have sex, it's love itself. Romantic sexual love evaporates in the face of that kind of abuse and that kind of drama, because now it's an existential struggle for survival and just getting enough air in the room so I can just be, so I can just go on with my life, instead of treating the problem as, and this is kind of a new idea I haven't talked about in this podcast, but treating our coupling as a sacred bubble, that contains the two of us, and that we're both inside the bubble, and every single possible problem we could ever have is outside the bubble. We are a team coming together to solve that problem over there. That problem is not my identity. That problem is not part of who I am. That problem is a separate thing. So even if the problem is she doesn't like the way I dress, which is a boundary around my options, my choices, I get to talk about it in those terms. Well, how could we be happy when that's sort of my thing and you're crossing the boundary around, we can still talk about the problem as if it's outside, instead of attacking my mate and calling her a controlling bee. I can go ahead and say other things that indicate I'm open to talking about this, but how do I even maintain my adult dignity if I'm a man who's not allowed to decide how he dresses himself?
Yeah.
If my choices on my grooming and my fashion and the way I pick friends and the music I listen to, like a little boy, I have to make sure mommy approves before I can do any of those things. Or she has to make sure daddy approves before she can do any of those things. That's ridiculous. None of us as adults want to have that relationship.
Yeah. And I'll say too, it's like with like people like that and my parents, it's like I like don't blame them or hold any of that. It's like, but it's all, they don't have, I mean, I felt like I wasn't equipped to have a relationship. So I can't imagine what they didn't have. So it's like, we're finally getting to a time, I think, in society where this information is becoming more and more available. So it's like,
I wish you were right. I hope you're right. It seems to me that maybe it's slowly getting better, but it's so slow. It's like watching paint dry or grass grow.
Yeah.
It just feels.
There's a movement happening. I know that. There's a lot of therapists talking about a lot of these things and doing that on social media. And it seems, I don't know if it's not the majority, obviously. I mean, just look at how things are, but it seems like there is a shift, at least a small section, maybe 1 to 5%, maybe. Or
well, any improvement is encouraging to me, but I just see it. For the people listening to this, I wouldn't want to encourage them to wait until it becomes fashionable to have an abuse-free relationship or to have abuse-free conflicts. But I guess I've had clients who've been made to feel weird, like they were asking for the moon because they wanted to have a conflict without abuse. And because the person they were talking to had never even heard of that concept.
Yeah.
And so, or, what kind of, or have their manhood questioned because he didn't want her even putting him down at a low tone of voice with a low volume.
Yeah.
What are you, some kind of baby? And I was like, hey, listen, I really want to have an abuse-free relationship because if you call me names, I'm not going to be able to tolerate that.
Yeah.
I'm going to end up behaving badly. So let's not go there. Or just leaving.
Yeah.
So it does affect our sexuality because everything is connected to everything. And even if she and I had makeup sex, there's this loss of respect for both of us when we argue that way.
Yeah.
There's no way I could have the same level of respect for somebody who's trying to control me or somebody who submits to my unthinking attempts to control her. I want, if we're going to have really great romances, we got to have really great equality.
Yeah. And we do that by resolving the conflicts that are keeping us apart.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thanks, Steve. All right. To wrap things up, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. Here is the question. Hi, Steve. Full disclosure, I attend one of your men's groups. My wife and I have an abuse-free home now. Thank you. That's in parentheses. But when we attend extended family get-togethers, we endure the yelling and name-calling that has been so normalized. My wife says we should just watch it like a spectator sport and not say anything. But I don't know how much longer I can go without confronting my brother and my parents. Should I even bother? I should mention that they drink a lot. So,
oh my goodness. Okay, so
good question for the podcast.
I come from a family of drinkers too, so I would recommend nobody talk to somebody who's in their cups under the influence of alcohol. You don't want to have a rational attempt at discussion on any important ideas, and these are important ideas. And I think the issue between this guy and his partner is their capacity for detachment. She's able to detach and watch it like watching the honeymooners, and Alice, I'm going to say trip to the moon, Alice.
Yeah, bang zoom to the moon.
Right? Yeah. Right. So, and he's a little more, he has a harder time letting go of that and being around it. And he finds it stressful. And I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way to be in that. We each have to take care of ourselves. But if it were me, and I felt like he feels, I would wait for a good time when my brother was sober. And then I would do that whole conflict card thing with him and say, I need like a half hour of your time. I just want to talk to you about something that's really bothering me. Is this a good time? And he'll say yes or no. And if he says, no, not really, then we reschedule it. And whenever it is that we get to that.
And then you ask like, well, when is a good time for you? Is that a good way of putting it?
Yeah, I would. We reschedule it to a time of our mutual convenience. And then I said, look, man, I'm having a really hard time lately hanging out with you. What do you mean? And then I go on to explain, I got to tell you, whenever I end up hanging out with you and you start drinking, it starts getting verbally abusive between you and the other people in the room. And it is not fun for me. And I don't like it. And I don't want to do it anymore. And I wanted to bring this to your attention because I know you care about me and I care about you. Can we figure out a solution to this? Well, I'm not giving up fucking drinking, and if that's the response, then, I've done what I can.
Yeah.
But if we can't, something I didn't say during this podcast was, if I can't resolve conflict with my partner, that doesn't absolve me of resolving the conflict. It just means that now I'm flying solo and I have to solve it by myself. So with my brother, if he's defensive about giving up his alcohol, then I'm going to solve it by myself, which means I won't be coming over. And if my parents ask why, I'm going to tell them. And so And if he brings it up again, I'm going to say, yeah, man, we talked about it. You said what you said, and I can respect that. It's your body. You get to drink as much as you want to. I just also have the right to have my body not be in the room. And if it was a girlfriend or a wife situation, a spousal situation, you bring a problem up and it really is a concerning problem. It really bothers you. Not a small one, but I mean, it could be small but significant to you. Like, say, your partner promised she was going to quit smoking, or he promised he was going to quit something that was really pervasive and an ongoing irritant. And they didn't keep their promise. And that's their right. They get to change their mind and they get to go ahead and continue doing whatever it is they're doing. But I can solve this problem on my own. It's just that you might not like my solution when I solve it on my own, because most of the time it's going to mean I'm not going to hang out with you. I'm either going to stop dating this person, or I'm going to move to another place, or in the case of people who, are sharing a bedroom but maybe not married, or I might move to another room. I mean, there's just a lot of potential solutions out there. And because life, again, is too short for me not to be feeling comfortable and enjoying this experience, when happiness is just one decision away.
Yeah. Wow. There you have it. Well, thank you very much for that question. And thanks, as always, Steve. And thank you all for listening. Have a good one.
Yeah, everybody, have a good one.